Well, it's so nice to see so many of you here this evening. My name's Ivan Gaskell. I'm Professor of Cultural History and Museum Studies here at Bard Graduate Centre. Although I feel tempted, not tempted, I feel as though I'm forgetting it because I want faculty leave this week. But before I introduce this evening's speaker in Museum Conversation Series, Martha Tedeschi, I want just to take a moment to acknowledge that Mother Hatter was an inhabited place for many generations prior to the arrival of settlers from overseas just a short time ago, and that we gathered on the ancestral lands of the Lenape peoples and their allies. Martha Tedeschi has been director of the Harvard Art Museum since July 2016, and so has been in this demanding position just about long enough to begin to feel at home. I'm so grateful that she now feels ready to speak about some of the challenges that she and her institution faced. The Harvard Art Museums have a long and complex history, a history that I have to admit to having played a walk-on role in it. I was a curator there for 20 years. Well, I was also on the faculty of the history department, not fine arts or history department. In consequence, I know just how Byzantine Harvard University is in its habits, its administration, and yes, its sheer effrontery. Regarding the place of the Harvard Art Museums in that strange and wonderful edifice that is Harvard University, all I can tell you is what I learned soon after my arrival there in 1991. The Harvard Art Museums are not simply a unit of Harvard University. They constitute a world-class art museum that just happens to have a university attached. Martha Tedeschi joined the Harvard Art Museums from another world-class art museum, the Art Institute of Chicago. She began there as a National Endowment for the Arts intern in 1982. At the time, I think my interns were in the
and we were like 3 years old.
And that was in the Department of Prints and Drawings. Thereafter, her rise was inexorable. She became assistant and associate curator and trust curator of prints and drawings, and in 2012, deputy director for art and research. I particularly like that last title, for it suggests that research, scholarship, is an integral aspect of the museum's responsibility. Building on her 1994 PhD dissertation from Northwestern University, How Prints Work, Reproductions, Originals and Their Markets in England, 1840 to 1900, Martha Tedeschi has made signal contributions to published scholarship on works on paper, notably those of 19th century British and American artists, especially, though not exclusively, James McNeill Whistler. Whistler is of central importance to her scholarship, and she is co-director of the online catalogue raisonné of Whistler etchings, launched in 2011 by the University of Glasgow. She's organised many exhibitions. One that caught my eye is Undressed, the Fashion of Privacy, held at the Art Institute of Chicago in 2013. It's a very BGC kind of topic. She's also much in demand to contribute to catalogues of exhibitions organised by other museum scholars. For instance, last year she published Pictures in the Truest Sense, a reflection on Homer's English watercolours, in the catalogue of the absolutely first-rate exhibition Coming Away, Winslow, Homer and England, which I was fortunate enough to see at the Worcester Art Museum, but it was also at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Finally, I think the esteem in which Martha Tedeschi is held in the community of scholars of works of art on paper is attested to by her having served as president of the Print Council of America between 2009 and 2013. Martha is truly a power in the purlieus of paper. This evening, Martha will give us field notes on how the art museums, Harvard Art Museums, are responding. Please join me in welcoming Martha.
Ivan, thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much. I've so long admired your work, and it's such a pleasure now because of my position at Harvard that we are starting to get to know each other. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you to the students and faculty and faculty colleagues of the Bard Graduate Center for this invitation. Thank you to Laura Minsky, who has helped me set up my slides so they're going to be looping. I wanted to warn you about that. I decided that what I really wanted to do tonight as a preface to a conversation I hope we will have together is to invite you into our building at the Harvard Art Museums. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen it since it reopened 4 years ago. But after some debate, I thought having a slide loop might give you the cumulative sense of what happens daily in this new building on the site of the old Fogg Museum across from Harvard. So it's the best way I could think of to give you a sense of this daily action and what I am starting to really think of as a different museum model, which is a dynamic use of the collection, and I'll say more about that shortly. So today I ask you to experience with me the new building as a teaching space as I share with you questions I'm asking myself as a first-time museum director and somebody who's been at Harvard for a little over 2 years. I'm told it takes 15 years until you feel like you really belong, so I am really trying to pace myself. Sometimes it's a little frustrating that change doesn't happen faster. I often tell my husband I feel like I'm running around frantically in cement booties. But I think that can be true in a lot of museums. I felt like that at the Art Institute too. The metaphor I used to use there was that it was an aircraft carrier and you turn the wheel like this really quickly and then 2 years later a slight shift to the right starting to pull up. So I think patience is a virtue and we need it in this field. So today I'm going to ask you to think with me about the potential and the challenges of my new institution. We have a new Ferrari in the garage. That's another metaphor that we've been using. But where will we drive it and how will we fuel it? The Harvard Art Museum serves a large and complex research university, as well as a local community and a national and international audience, particularly scholarly audiences. It's quite a different organism from the large municipal art museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, where I spent the majority of my career as a curator of works on paper. What I'm excited about now in my new life is the daily work of figuring out how to put these new spaces, and you're seeing them on the screen, to work in conjunction with a great collection. So what happens when you put this new building, which I will be the first to say I didn't build, the credit goes entirely to my predecessor, Tom Lentz, but I'm lucky enough to have the privilege now of driving the Ferrari. So how do we think about these spaces in conjunction with a world-class collection, as Ivan had said, and an unlimited number of potential partners on campus and beyond, the number of potential collaborators, institutes, centers, individual scholars, scientists. It goes on, and then there's what happens beyond our walls, and that's really important right now too. So what is the building telling us about how to innovate? Are we still a laboratory? Here you see Narayan Kandekar, the head of the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies, trying to figure out how to help Doris Salcedo preserve her works made out of rose petals. Because we bought one of these works and now the onus is on us to work with the artist to figure out how they can be preserved and shown over and over again, and to help her understand, what the real limits to that material might be in the future. So I think we were founded as a laboratory, and yes, I would say we still are a laboratory, but a different kind of laboratory. I think the traditional definition of a laboratory is a closed space for specialists. I think that's not what we're aspiring to be now. We're really hoping to be something more open that speaks to experimentation and innovation, and where we're learning from our building how we can push it in different directions to stage different kinds of conversations, interactions, looking experiences, how we can bring many more voices to bear on the collection. So how do we heighten the impact of our teaching, training, and our welcome to all visitors? Here is our newest curator, Makita Best, who's the curator of photography now at the Art Museums, who curated one of her first shows next door in the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts, surrounded by artist studios. So we are also thinking about how to break out of our walls a bit, and who the curators are who can help us do that. Who are those people? So I want to give, for those of you who may not have either been to the new museum or don't know as much about us, I want to give you a tiny introduction. Our mission, as stated on our website, includes a sentence I like very much, which is to bring to light the intrinsic power of art for all people. And I think the building was really intended to be a kind of symbol of that mission. So it's very transparent, as you probably notice. Wherever you're standing in the museum, you can sort of see what's going on in other parts of the museum. The scale of the galleries is small enough that it encourages people to stop and look at one object, rather than, let's say, a bigger municipal art museum where you might feel driven to browse, your way across the entire museum, trying to see the whole thing in one day. The Harvard Art Museums, I think the scale people find very inviting because they can see quite a bit of the collection without having to move so fast, and they can linger over individual works of art. And you'll see images in the slideshow that shows some of the tools we're giving people, magnifying glasses for coins and jewelry, for example. As well as the art study centers, where so much of what we do unfolds on a daily basis. So the renovation, which was completed in November of 2014, so we are now at exactly our 4-year mark of being open. One of the major intentions was to bring 3 museums under one roof. So the Fogg Art Museum, which was founded in 1895, but which was rebuilt on the current site in 1927. The Busch Reisinger Museum, the Dramatic Museum, which was founded in 1901. And the Sackler Museum, which is the relative newcomer, founded in 1985. These were all in separate buildings, which, if you try to imagine teaching art history or actually using collections to teach a wide variety of other disciplines, is really problematic because the different parts of the world can never talk to each other. So now they are all under one roof with an elevator that goes straight from storage to a 4th floor that is entirely given up to teaching spaces. Some of them are laboratories, but most of them are study rooms and seminar rooms where objects just churn through all day long. 70 classes a week, plus individual scholars, individual members of the public. So last academic year, 58,000 objects were called for in these rooms that you're looking at right here, which is pretty much unheard of. If anybody knows, of a place that's doing access at a higher rate, I'd be interested to hear about it. It's obviously not easy. It's a major investment of resources, but it means that all day long, the 4th floor of that museum is buzzing with people looking closely at objects, talking about objects. We have a very interdisciplinary thing going on now because the collection is being used to teach across the entire curriculum. So we have professional schools teaching there. We have sciences, STEM fields. This young lady is Harvard's first ever major joint concentrator in art history and chemistry, which could only be done because there was a conservation scientist to oversee her course of study. So we are, really thinking about how communal looking, an interdisciplinary approach to looking can be fostered on a daily basis. It's a very different approach to collection access. So most museums, have maybe 2 to 3% of their collections on view. Some do better. We probably have closer to 1 because it's a very big collection on prescribed site that couldn't really grow. So we're doing it a different way, and the collection is coming into storage every day for different reasons, and people are putting it to work in their own ways. They're using their own ideas about how, what stories they want to tell, or what kinds of, you can even stage a private seminar there. A graduate student can say, I want to gather 20 people together to think about my thesis topic, and makes an appointment and asks for the objects to come up, and that can happen, as well as the ones that we stage as a museum through public programming. So this is to give you a little sense of, the idea behind this new building, which is that every space would be a teaching space. This is the top floor, and you're seeing a reflection of the Lightbox Gallery, which is a space for digital media, and particularly for students who want to experiment with digital media or work with artists. Here's the Lightbox Gallery again. On commissions for digital media, so sometimes you have an artistic project, sometimes you have film. Often we have really interesting things that have been done with our collection data, so we'll have a computer science course embedded in our digital initiatives department working with the Lightbox Gallery, and actually thinking about interesting things that can be done with the collection data. How do you slice it and dice it? What does it tell us about the collection? But also, what else can it do? We had a sound artist who used collection data to create music. So how do you, also put the collection to work in ways that, we never really imagined years ago. So, but in general, what we try to do on a daily basis is foster close looking and intimacy of experience, multiple perspectives. We think a lot about materiality with the Strauss Center, which was the first conservation department in the United States. We have a real long expertise in materiality, which I sometimes think is the new word for connoisseurship. It's the new, more palatable word that we sometimes use. But we are completely devoted as an institution to process, to artistic materials, particularly interested now in living artists who are working with non-traditional materials, and how we help them think about what's going to happen to their art as we go forward. We're doing oral histories with living artists now. But maybe one of the things I like most about this big transparent building that you've been getting a glimpse at is that it creates a sense that we are a community of lookers, of observers, of close lookers. You can be alone in a gallery and having a very intimate experience, but we can look up 2 floors and see conservators moving around in their lab, and on the next floor, a group of high school students from Cambridge Fringe and Latin, which is right outside our back door, or a mother with a baby carriage. But you can feel part of a collective looking experience and still have a pretty private, quiet, contemplative looking experience. We've now got the pigment collection on view, and the public is totally fascinated by that. I noticed an interesting display right outside here. Yes. So, here you go. Here's the pigment collection, which was founded by Forbes, is another major name in our early history, but is still used as a reference collection every day by conservation scientists. So especially what's new, I would say, is the level of access at the Harvard Art Museums. It's a dynamic collection model, as I've described, where the collection moves around. It goes back to sleep at night in storage. But there are certainly alternatives to how to make your collection live besides hanging them on the wall, and we are giving that the good old college try, as they say, literally. So, wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges. I mean, this is all very hunky-dory. We have a beautiful new building. We have a great collection. We now think it's the 7th largest art museum collection in the country, which makes it's 250,000 objects, which is about the size of the Art Institute or the Philadelphia Museum. Obviously, our building is much smaller, which is one of the reasons why we've gone to this more dynamic collection model. But we have, some real challenges. This is a big museum, this collection. And I think we know, all of us in this room know, that being a leader of a museum in this day and age is really tough. And I don't think it's a coincidence that so many directors in this country have directorships have turned over recently. Just in the last few weeks, we've heard about people vacating, really well-known, distinguished professionals who are stepping away, and not necessarily because they're retiring. They're going on to try new things. But I think that it's not an easy time to be in a position where year after year after year you're trying to sustain innovation, you're trying to address the sort of political issues that museums get embroiled in, you're trying to do it on a small budget. And more and more, I think we're at the crossroads where we wonder, how political should we be? Should we be neutral? Are we partisan? What does that look like? How do you answer those questions? I'm not going to try to answer these questions, but I'm just saying that these are the things that go through our minds as we're thinking about where to take our museums. Museums are inherently political institutions. When Franklin published an interesting article in Apollo a few months ago about the challenges of running an art museum in this day and age. She, of course, is the director of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and she feels that museums are inherently political, and that the uncertainty and volatility of our time propel us to action. And it's not a coincidence that it is the Minneapolis Institute of Arts that implemented a new annual conference now called Mass Action, which is about social justice in the museum sphere. So these are the lengths to which our fellow museums feel they must go now to participate in our moment. Identity politics, huge. If we think about all of the ink that was spilled around Brooklyn Museum and its hiring of a white African curator, for example. But that's one small example, and it happens all the time. Social justice, global citizenship. Global citizenship is a big thing at Harvard right now. The undergraduate gen ed curriculum is now focused on global citizenship. We need to participate in that. What does it look like to teach that? These are, again, questions. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, Madeline Grinstein, a very well-respected director now, going on at least 10 years, I think, of that museum, has said museums, like great works of art, should raise consciousness. What does it mean to raise consciousness as a museum? How do you do that? Whose consciousness are you raising? And which objects are you using to do that? These are all pretty intentional conversations that we need to have. Should we be neutral? Can we even be not neutral? Are we partisan when we open ourselves up to critical conversations, but we really don't want the other half of the conversation to happen in our museum? What does that mean? So these are really tough questions. And these are maybe tougher than, the fundraising questions that we're facing in some ways. So, I think I'm noticing this with my own staff. want to do more than just host a critical conversation anymore. We're fond of saying that that's what we do so well, but what does that really mean? And I think that they, like many other museum professionals, want to help solve some of the world's biggest problems. How do we do that? Who do we partner with to do that? How can museums help to empower their communities is another question I think about all the time. Are we safe spaces or are we not safe spaces? Are we pushing our own agenda or listening to the agenda of many different voices and trying to make a place for all of those agendas? And by the way, I'm saying that I'm not answering these, but I guess what I'm sharing with you now at my sort of 2-year mark as a new director is the kinds of questions that buzz through my mind that, I don't even know if there is a right solution. But I think that we need to be talking about and working at it. And what I'm going to propose in a moment is that every institution can do something, and they should try to figure out what they can do best, what's in their wheelhouse. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So my point is that museums and their leaders are increasingly feeling pressure to respond in some way. And so what my colleagues and I at Harvard are asking ourselves, especially right now, is what can university museums do uniquely? What can we contribute? We have big global constituencies. Just think about Harvard's alumni base, for example, which can be exhausting and stretch us. We're trying to keep up with everybody. I'm on a plane all the time. And contrary to popular opinion, we often have a shortage of resources, space, funds, people. But the upside is we also have permission to innovate, to research, and to go deep, sometimes very, very deep, much more so than, let's say, a large municipal art museum that has to be so many things to so many people. So we, I think our ability to do the deep dive is actually one of our strengths. And I'm not just talking about Harvard, I'm talking about university art museums more generally. I also think, we have the unique ability to make visible original thinking and research in real time. New ideas that are just hatching can be manifested in our museums. And the other thing we have, which I think all museums envy, is a really young and diverse demographic. So this is, what we all would love to have is that next generation, and we'd like it to be a diverse audience. And universities, more and more, are able to provide that. So if we think about that as one of our assets, at Harvard this year, the freshman class for the first time is majority minority. And actually, I think it started barely last year, and this year it is definitely so. So think about, that as an asset. If we're thinking about, for example, the next generation of museum professionals, shouldn't we be trying to recruit from that demographic right now? They are at our door. They want to be with us. The first slide I showed you was our student late night when 1,500 students lined up to get into the building. So we, here they are. What are we going to do with them, for them, and for our field? So, at Harvard, what it seems to me, after really spending a year listening, another year getting to know my staff, getting to know Harvard and our colleagues across the university, to me it seems critical that we identify our moment in history, that is, the fog, the Bush Rising, or the Sackler, the moment when this new building has opened, and decide how we will uniquely respond given the assets that we now have. What is our sweet spot is what I keep asking. What is our sweet spot? We're not going to do everything. We aren't the kitchen sink, we can't be that. But if we can't do everything, what can we do for maximum impact? And what we're starting to talk about, my colleagues and me, and university administration, is one, pivoting a bit more towards the public, not away from the university, but towards the public. So what does it mean to find a way to serve Harvard through serving the public? I'll talk about that in a minute. And then number 2, preparing the next generation of museum professionals, arts leaders. And so those now are our 2 areas of focus. And one of the reasons that I can say that pretty clearly like that is because we spent the last 4 years reaching out across Harvard, reaching out to faculty. The curricular part is going really well, and it's driving itself. And in fact, that appetite, 58,000 objects called for in 1 year, if we drive that too much more, we won't be able to keep up. So we feel, we're in a good place with that. So now what? Now what? And so we're looking at the ways that we can serve Harvard and serve the public together. And so the programs I'm looking for now are those that have a synergy between the university and civic engagement. And I'll give you just a few really easy and quick ideas. So our student guides, we've done away with docents. Our guides are students now, they're undergraduates from across the curriculum, and they create their own tours, they do their own research, they have to use objects from all the museums, and they are our public interface. So when a member of the public comes to have a tour of a museum, they're going on a tour with a Harvard student who has designed and researched their own tour. That program is working out so well, it just was endowed for $1 million so that we can pay 25 guides every year in perpetuity now. And that was by sending the donor on these tours. They are really good tours. These are Harvard students using their minds in their own ways, using their own disciplinary interests, bringing them to bear on the collection, but covering the entire museum and making sure that they're providing a global picture of the museum. Another example is our high school program. So Cambridge French and Latin is the only public high school in Cambridge. It's huge, it's extremely diverse. You have faculty, students from Harvard, you have many, many immigrant children. So it's a really wide range. Some 40 languages are spoken in this school. So we now have a program with Cambridge French and Latin, which is taught by Harvard graduate students of education. So we work with the graduate students and get them ready to work with the teachers and students at Cambridge French and Latin. And then they immerse themselves in the curriculum and find ways to bring the curriculum alive by repeat visits to the museum. So this is not a field trip model. The students are coming multiple times during the year, but they're working with our graduate students who are getting their teaching practical by doing this project. So again, a kind of synergy between community and doing for Harvard students. The student board, we have a student board that's made up of 12 undergraduate students, one from every house, and they are learning the ropes about board membership, not-for-profit board membership, philanthropy, institutional critique, and we're getting little board members ready to go out into the world. And in the meantime, they're telling us, what we're not doing right, what we should be doing better for a younger demographic, for example. So, I can't resist telling this very cute story. One of them, who graduated last year, moved here to Manhattan and wrote to us and said, "I've looked all over the website, but I can't find the application for the Met's board." The student, when you're getting on the student board at the Harvard Art Museums, wanted to join the Met's board. So, and I'm sure this student will eventually do that, but the application's not on the web. But anyways, the idea that not everybody's going to become a curator or a conservator or an art historian, but they might become arts leaders in other ways. And if we're nurturing that, then that's one way that we can respond and that we can find synergy between student experience and what ultimately we do for our community. So we've got 3 pillars of our new museum plan, and how are we doing on time?
We've got plenty of time.
Okay. This summer we did a little bit of self-assessment and internally driven strategic planning. 4 years seems a little too early to do a whole new strategic plan. There's a lot of thought given to the new building, so I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But we did an internal process that allowed us to bring ideas up through the ranks, and we honed our priorities because we realized we were starting to max out. Could we do everything? And so we have come up with 3 pillars of our museum plan that are very closely related to the 2 focuses I just mentioned. The first is museum training, and that's where I want to take this conversation next. Thinking about the pathway into the field of museums, issues around racial and gender equity, how do we make an inclusive pathway, what does that look like, what's it going to take, who's going to need to be our partners in that, who will our future museum leaders be, what do they need to know, what kind of characters do they need to have, what skills will they need, and how do we help them get ready. Second pillar, contemporary art and issues, and the way we're defining that at Harvard is not just contemporary art, but also fresh ideas for deployment of the historic collections. So I gave you that example of the surrealist collections, for example, being used to teach a particular form of language. So we're also trying to think of, how do you make the historic collections contemporary again by attaching them to things we're learning and talking about right now. Living artists will be a big part of that, and I think I've mentioned that we strive to have a hallmark of our program being engaging with artists who are working in non-traditional materials and who may actually benefit from a reciprocal relationship with the museum that has a lot of technical expertise and where students can be involved in the process, the artistic process of making. And then we are also doing oral histories, as I mentioned, and we saw some pictures of Doris Salcedo, who was in residence with us for several weeks installing her show, but also working on ultimate long-term preservation of her work. And the third pillar is, not a surprise, visitor experience and audience. Because we are making that pivot towards the public, we are thinking about things that I don't think the Harvard Art Museums, all 3 of them, have really pushed themselves to think about before. I think there was a great, strong sense of mission to serving the university and to always being a teaching institution, but I think less so thinking about just things that make the ordinary visitor comfortable in your museum. Wayfinding, signage. When I arrived at Harvard, the typeface was so tiny I could barely see it. We were very refined, we were very minimal. But we sort of conveyed a little bit of a sense of hardship, I would say. When you walk into the show, you are going to have to work really hard. And, so just thinking about ways that we can continue to do the great original scholarship, the wonderful exhibitions that our curators are working on right now, but to make them feel more accessible, more welcoming, more interesting to a broader audience. I want to sell more books. I want more people to come to our shows. And so how do you do that? So that's something that I think needs to be part of our next conversation. But, so today, what I thought I would focus on a little bit, because it is one of maybe the most important pillar in some ways. One of them is a focus on museum training and the preparation of museum professionals for the future. Many of you are aware of the Paul Sachs, the celebrated museum course that Paul Sachs offered at Harvard between 1921 and 1948. When he, in his own words, was creating museum men. direct quote. So there's a new book out that some of you may be aware of by Andrew McClellan, a Tufts professor, who talks about Paul Saxon, the famous museum course, and traces not only what was being taught, but, you know, were those museum managers. Most of them became museum directors, so it was a very important seed program for a burgeoning professional field. And much has changed since then. Some of it good, I would say. We're not just creating a museum men anymore. But some hasn't. At the time, the FOG was founded as a laboratory for art, and quite a bit of risk-taking and experimentation was taken. A very, very early exhibition on fakes and forgeries was offered as part of that course. And you know, so I think we haven't lost that wish to experiment and innovate in the way we teach. It's just changed. Connoisseurship itself, we've talked about, it has morphed. So certainly connoisseurship is alive and well. Anybody in the museum field knows that, even if it for a while was a dirty word in our history department. But you don't send a curator to Maastricht, you know, with a budget to acquire for the museum with no connoisseurship skills, right? That doesn't work either. So we need to learn about how to look at objects critically, how to decode them, how to analyze, you know, what makes them right or not right, attribution, understanding techniques and processes. Technical art history now has become such an important mode of inquiry for art historians. So, you know, connoisseurship, I think, has morphed into something else, but it's not gone. And if anything, it's more inclusive of a whole set of skills. One of the things we're doing now at the Harvard Art Museums is sending graduate students and fellows to the Salon de Dessin, or the Drawings Week in London, or to the Print Fair in New York with curators and conservators. And they fan out over the fair. They're each given a quadrant to cover. They're supposed to be making suggestions of acquisitions. They've been given some training before that, but there's, you know, huddles that happen on the floor all the way through. They know how to, you know, think about provenance. They're looking up auction prices on their phones. They're looking up our database to see how the work connects to what's in the Harvard Art Museums. And so they are getting real-time practice of, you know, what you do when you're a brand new baby curator and you're sent out there for the first time. I know I found it completely intimidating. The first time I went to London, I went up and down Bond Street by myself as a 24-year-old curator. And so, you know, these are the kinds of skills that we think we can actually provide. And our curators who are attracted to Harvard, partly because of the teaching and mentorship mission, are really keen to do this work. So that's something else that we're doing. So what we're thinking about now is all our different programs, from the high school program that I mentioned to our Summer Institute for Technical Studies in Art, which is funded by the Mellon program, which is technical art history for graduate students from all over the country. It's an intensive summer program. So we run the whole gamut and everything in between: student guides, student boards, graduate student internships, undergraduate student internships. But what I began to feel is that we really needed to do an audit of everything that we were doing. We were doing individual mentoring. We have a big postdoctoral fellows program, but the dots weren't connecting. And so what we're trying to do now, and will be an experiment, is to see if we can bridge the programs and create an actual pathway. Like, what does the visual pathway look like? If, you know, if in high school the introduction looks like exposure, you know, then what's the next step? What's the next step? Clearly things like ensuring paid internship experiences at different levels will be critical. Another gap we've identified in the field is actually the gap year or the post-bac experience after college. Many students, particularly if we're trying to really create an inclusive pipeline, many students are not ready to go into a PhD program right after college. I would say most of them. if they're smart. So, but how do we keep them in the field? How do we give them the experience that will allow them to be successful and apply to the best programs? So this is what we're looking at now, is what does the bridge look like from start to finish? And this is where, I hope maybe in a few minutes we can talk about that together. I'm really interested to hear ideas that might be bubbling up at BARD or at other museums here in Manhattan about what that pathway can look like. And, if we're going to create these resilient leaders that we're going to need, what do we need to do for them? What are the skills that we need? How do we help? What are all the steps that can be taken? At Harvard, another thing that we're doing now is working in a new way with the History of Art department. So we proposed that we offer a course in History of Art that would be called The Object of the Museum. Sort of going back to the Paul Sachs course, but in a very updated way. And the History of Art department has welcomed that. It was designed by curators, a team of curators. It will be taught by curators, but will be a graduate level course in the History of Art department starting in the spring, which will introduce emerging art historians to the museum environment, to object-based research, to some basic skills like cataloging, which can help them no matter what their dissertation topics may be, or whether they're destined for museums or not. This is not necessarily a course for museum people, it's a course for art historians who need to be able to, in the future, to survive, move fluidly around the art world, including into museums and between universities and museums. One of the things we can look at is the needs that have already been identified by programs like the Center for Curatorial Leadership or the Getty Leadership Institute, which have identified a real need for training in the museum field, and they've posited a few things. Business training is something that most museum leaders are not getting as part of their historical training, maybe not surprisingly. But some other things have been identified too. The Center for Curatorial Leadership has invested very heavily in the idea that curators should be mentors. And all curators in that program are required to take on a mentee and to think about the issue of diversity and inclusiveness in museums. What it looks like to sustain students' interest into the field. The Getty has also recently taken on certain projects like the panel painting project and the paper project, which have identified a need for training in very specific field-specific areas. So right now there's a paper project going on that Harvard is participating in that is offering mid-career training to works on paper curators who have missed the ability to learn certain things like about imaging technologies that might help them make decisions about attributions, for example. And that's a program that will run this summer at Harvard. The Mellon object-based learning collaborations that have now grown thanks to that funding between universities and museums, I think are making very important contributions to graduate education and also showing the big museums, the municipal museums, how to work with universities and vice versa. But there is also an undergraduate one that is very much focused on bringing a more diverse cohort of undergraduate students into the museum field, and that's happening at 5 museums around the country. Many of these programs, especially the Mellon programs, emphasize institutional collaboration, partnership, and diversity, so that's definitely a trend that we see. But you can also look at the HBCU schools, which have a new alliance of art museums of historically Black colleges and universities that are offering conservation training. So there is actually a lot starting to happen out there. For every everybody's doing something slightly different, which I think is good. So we all have to kind of figure out what our unique contributions are. So just to conclude, I think there's no question that museums have to respond to our times. Yet we are in general undercapitalized and under-resourced. So how we respond and how we use our resources are questions that are intimately tied to each other. And while that puts a lot of pressure on museum leaders, boards, employees, I also believe that we actually have a wide variety of choices and options for how we respond individually as institutions if we look at our own sweet spots and look for synergy in our programs. Think about museum impact, maximum impact, rather than trying to do everything that everyone else is doing. So we each need to assess what we can do uniquely well, where we can make the most impact, and how we can best leverage our unique assets for maximum contribution. At Harvard, leveraging a world-class collection and a long-standing dedication to training emerging professionals, we can get people ready to pilot museums into the future, a future that could realistically be even more complicated than our own volatile present moment. We need to build resilient, nimble, and well-prepared leaders. And I'm going to close there and say that I'd love for us to spend some time thinking together about how to do that. Thank you.
Well, Martha, all I can say is you can drive my Ferrari. I have lots of questions myself, but I want to invite, first of all, any students to ask questions, to have a first shot, whether students of our own, from our graduate centre or from elsewhere. But please open the questions.
Are you tired of looking at these slides? We could probably start. No?
Persian berries are wonderful.
Two of them are doing amazing curatorial projects. I'm going to put them on the spot right there.
Tell us all about Well, while you're gathering your thoughts, let's open the floor to everyone. Yes.
Concerning your two broad goals of waiting for the public and building museum professionals, since you came, in relation to this, has there been any change in your website, and how might you see that relating to these two areas and perhaps changing in the future?
Excellent question. We haven't redesigned it since I arrived because it was relatively recently designed. But I'm pleased to say that the collection is 100% on the website, which to me is absolutely critical now that we have those study rooms, because people can now choose anything from the collection and see it in the study rooms. And they can make those appointments from halfway across the world, and they do, to see things. But so I think that's probably the most important recent change in the website, is that the collection is there 100%. The other thing I'll mention is that we are doing a new kind of web publication called Special Collections, where we're taking curated groups of the collection and adding significant text and scholarship. So almost, like a mini volume on a particular area. So to give you an example, we're going into the Bauhaus anniversary year. So we had a postdoctoral fellow do a special collection on the website that is everything in our collection that's related to the Bauhaus. Harvard has a significant Bauhaus history, and there's deeper text, but it's sort of curated in a way that you don't have to do that search yourself. It's there.
And what about in relation to the public? Any changes, how they use it, convenience, graphics, what have you?
I mean, we're always updating it and changing it, but I would say, it's new enough that we haven't thrown the baby out with the water yet. It's the public uses the search feature for the collection very frequently. We also have an online magazine called Index Magazine, which has sort of I would say publicly accessible behind-the-scenes articles about things that are going on in the museum. That's been quite popular as well. So, I mean, there are quite a few different features. I'm not sure if you're looking for a particular type of thing, like what the Met's doing.
Well, actually, coming from where I'm coming from, visiting, historically, I found the website very scrolly, too scrolly. So I'm leading toward that, how can you concisely get what it is you're looking for as a member of the public?
Right, the scrolling problem actually is being worked on right now. But it hasn't, I don't think you'll see a change yet. It's being worked on now.
Okay,
You're right, though.
thank you.
I can attest to the comprehensiveness of the collection availability of information and photographs online. I was looking just the other day, I'm interested in a piece in the collection that is in two pieces, and it's a ruin of a Sienese 14th century painting that was found in the 1920s, used as a barn door shutter. And this has been in the collection since I almost gave these two bits. And you can just make out that once it had a female saint on it. We know from the punch marks that it's from the workshop of Pietro Lorenzetti. Nobody had bothered with this thing for decades until I started poking around with it. And the photos of both halves are there online. And I thought that was really a good sign.
Well, as everyone knows, it's a work in progress,
Yes.
right? And we're lucky to have this rather large group, like 15 postdoctoral fellows who, in their own area, are cataloging in a deeper way. So, for example, the very important Indian painting collection is now being deeply cataloged. So, it's getting better all the time.
Jen?
I love the new building, it's absolutely gorgeous, and I love the visual access that it allows, and also the access that you're allowing to the students. But I have two concerns. One is the Sackler family is now facing criminal prosecution, and I know that a lot of us in the art world are faced with having the Sackler name attached to our institutions, and if that's something that are you having conversations about this? And then secondly, when you look at the population of Asian students at Harvard and what they're dealing with, it seems like this would be an opportunity for the museum to do good in their own backyard, having some program to in some way address the quotas that have been put on Asian students.
So the Sackler question is a little hard for me to comment on because Harvard, has a no comment policy right now. But what I will say is just some issues around historical fact, which is that when Arthur Sackler made the gift that endowed the Sackler building in 1985, it was Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, etc. We have, however, had a protest in the courtyard. Nan Golden and a group including Harvard medical students did do a protest in that space. So I think, the Sackler name is arousing a lot of attention, whether in fact it's the right Sacklers or not. But in this case, it was a gift by a member of the Sackler family who was dead by the time OxyContin was invented and started to be sold. As far as your question about Asian students, and I'm sure you're referring to the recent court case around admissions. yes, we've been paying a lot of attention to that. We have great Asian collections, of course, and so foregrounding those, I think is one of the ways that makes sense from where we sit, and that means really trying to engage faculty to be teaching across the board from those collections, making sure that they're not buried in that Asian cultures are being celebrated in the programming that we do, which I would say is true. I think we also have a very diverse student board, and the students are actually charged with student engagement on campus. So they're the ones who are meant to be bringing their peer groups in. They bring their houses in. The houses all have their own TVs, in which they have tours, and we feed them, all of that. So the students are meant to be engaging the undergraduate population, and they are. And they're doing a really good job, and they're bringing their own peers. So those are two, areas that I think are working pretty well. And I'd also say our student guides, there are many student guides who are Asian and who are, particularly interested in teaching from the Asian collections. And that's who our public is encountering on a daily basis in the museums. So I think there's more that we can be doing. It's a very unique conversation, obviously. This case just ended. So.
Yes.
I thought I would try and push a little bit on the museum training questions.
Yeah.
Since you're interested in talking about that, and I wanted to say, first of all, what an amazing array of things you're doing. I don't know how you could do any more, but I'm sure you'll find ways. I guess I wanted to think about the notion of the pathway, because one thing that strikes me is the range of experiences that museum people need now, which you mentioned. And pathway connotes a little bit something maybe, I understand the principle and trying to consolidate, but
I think
maybe,
it's actually kind of a newer word we've been using instead of pipeline.
yeah, it's better than pipeline. You can younger on the pathway.
Yeah.
But I guess I thought one way to think about it is, and I know from teaching students at a university where there was a lot of emphasis on the sciences, and all of my students were stressed because all of their friends were, I'm on the pathway to med school, I'm on the pathway to, it was very, and they had an envy of that, and I always tried to persuade them that there was something stressful but also really productive about the meandering pathway, let's say. So I guess I thought one way to think about it would be to look at the positions that you see needing to be filled, or the sort of jobs that are emerging now that are not curator, educator, that are kind of beginning to fuse or actually break out of those familiar silos that we've known throughout the museums, and how those are, what you're noticing. Are you appointing people in different kinds of jobs that have different kinds of skills, and then we can't see the future, but can we begin to see?
And we are thinking about this as breaking out of our traditional purview, which was curatorial and conservation. I think those will always be our sweet spots, but I think we are really hoping that pathway can be for what we're generally calling museum leaders. In other words, people who might be thought leaders, but in a completely different part of the museum. And I agree with you about the pathway, and I think when I talked about the bridge that we're thinking of creating, I don't think we're picturing that the same student would necessarily start in high school and come out the other end at Harvard in the doctoral program. I think what we're looking at, from my standpoint, the important thing is to look at what those critical moments are in the pathway and make sure that we are providing those, whether the student comes in at a different moment But for example, I think, to me, it feels like a big gap in our field right now that we don't have those gap year or not enough of these post-bac. And conservation may be more important than anywhere, these pre-program internships or fellowships. How do you get a portfolio that gets you into one of these exclusive programs? And, so I think we're really interested in identifying sort of what you need at each stage of the pathway. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily meander. But I think there are sort of certain experiences that we can provide that are helpful and necessary.
And so can you say what some of those things, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of when you think about those nodes on the pathway, what they are. Are they familiar with technical art history so that you can at least speak to conservators, and are they about technology? I mean,
well, yeah, I've got a rough list here that I started that I thought other people might want to riff on. And these are a little all over the place, so some of them you'll recognize as things that would be tutorial, others not, but rigorous scholarly training, research skills, cataloging, which I continue to think is actually really important to be able to look and write down what you're seeing. Connoisseurship, however we want to define that, technical understanding of art and art processes, knowledge of imaging technologies, vocabularies and appetite for collaboration. In other words, if you are a curator or a conservator, how do you talk to each other? Or how do you talk to a technologist? So those vocabularies, I think, for collaboration are really important. Oral and written communications in general, teaching, how do you teach in a museum setting? What does that look like? Mentorship is another skill that I think is broadly applicable across multiple disciplines. Communicating with public audiences, how do you get people excited about your niche of scholarship? Negotiating difficult conversations, internal understanding of how to deal with difficult conversations, understanding identity politics, particularly inherent in museum collections, displays in workplaces. So, I think that's not just a curatorial conservation skill anymore. Educators, technologists, collection management, people are really impacted by these sort of sensitivities around museum collections. Budgets, fundraising, art market, community issues, sensibilities and realities, institutional citizenship. What does it mean to think beyond your departmental niche to the benefit of the larger institution? Development, donor relationships. I mean, this is just
So the students groaning down there.
the students are groaning, but they're all really interesting. But this is why I think, we're seeing the need to look at this bridge idea, because you're not going to teach all of these in one class. Right. And you're going to
them are learned through doing anyway.
learn through doing. So what does the learning through doing look like? And that's a really important part of this question. Yeah.
I'm kind of starving to hear the word exhibition.
Yeah.
But what's wonderful is, this idea of being able to pull out objects and dive into objects. And when I was in graduate school in Iowa, I used to love to go to Cleveland, and Louise Richards, I think, was, and she would pull all these great prints, whatever we wanted to see, it was phenomenal. But when you place a number of things in some configuration, you're implying all kinds of relationships. And that's a form of communication where you're not present, but you've done something. And I would just love to see, and of course that has impacts on the institution in every way and draws on different skills from different practitioners. But I would love to see a kind of exhibition space that was like a sound stage, where all of the stuff you need is sort of there. And then you're challenging students to collaborate, to organize themselves toward some conception they have, and again, to understand one is put together and it's open to others, well, what was communicated is something completely different. And so understanding that translation that happens, or that telegraphing of information and what can happen to it, I think would be a valuable part of their education.
Absolutely, and I actually, I didn't try to mention everything, but pretty much every exhibition we're doing now has a student component. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily designed the installation, but they've written labels or many of the exhibitions now start with a seminar where the ideas bubble up, and then they end with a seminar when the exhibition is on the walls, and a different group of students is analyzing what happens in the space. And many of them have had a chance to publish now in catalogs and also in labels and on these special collections on the website. But I think you're exactly right. I mean, even the question of being able to give someone 5 objects, all the different ways you can work with those objects is really interesting.
I mean, I just want to, there are a number of people in this room, including and perhaps principally Ivan, who's the head of our Focus project, and Nina and I and Aaron, and I mean, many of us, and I mean, so many people around this table are very involved and engaged with students and exhibitions and trying to think. I mean, Nina and I are teaching a class right now.
That one, this one, that one, I'm pointing to them to put them on the spot.
I mean, this is something
Create magnificent
take
products.
pretty seriously at the Bard Graduate Center, not to be too self-congratulatory because it's obviously a work in progress. And there are just, every time you, I mean, it's very difficult. It's a wonderful idea, but it's in practice, it's hard because, you know, it's hard to borrow things and it's hard. There's a lot of back-end stuff that has to happen, even for the most simple student exhibition, the timing.
Exhibition lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, all these things, we struggle with this in many ways all the time here, but I think we definitely understand. I mean, I think the key in an art history program is to prepare students to think in a variety of ways about objects and not to just think of them as things you can put on a screen and manipulate on a page. You know, that they have a life of their own that's about where they are given points in time and space, and that's, you know, another dimension that it's very, I mean, another thing is it's very hard to say to students, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can become a curator, right? You know, if you study these things and you take these classes and you have all these things on your CV, you're gonna get a great job as a curator. You know, I mean, it's the pathway. It's not like medical school or law school or business school, you know? The outcome is not, there's not the same trajectory from like A to B to Z. It just doesn't work that way. So I think it's just by nature, it's a different conversation that you would need to have with the students. So, I mean, no matter how much it's systematized in terms of there's certain skills and there's mentoring and there's this and that, you're not going to come out with the same results. And not to be completely negative.
Not always, obviously not.
That's it.
I just sort of picking up on what Elizabeth was asking and commenting on. I was wondering if you're, I mean, we're talking about art history and the art museum, but I feel like maybe today there are also people coming into the field from other disciplines, and I wonder how you're working with them and bringing them into the museum.
I think that's actually really important. And I think particularly if we're thinking about opening the field up to, a broader range of students from, underrepresented backgrounds, I think expecting that everybody's going to come to your door from an art history program is not realistic. And that is, actually why our undergraduate programs, both the student board and the student guide training program, or not for history students. I mean, we're not excluded from it, but that's not a requirement, or even a preference in those programs. But I think it's true. I think, Harvard, we're also seeing a lot of double concentrators and graduate students who are working across departments and working in art history and African American studies. Having an internship with us gives them a sense of whether they might like to work in museums, or at least how museums can be used for research. It's such a complicated question. Where are these people going to come from? Our future leaders.
Can I follow up on that? Because this is the Harvard Art Museum is obviously a museum within a university, and a university, a major research university that has that deals with any number of disciplines. And so much of what is really exciting that happens in a university such as Harvard is what happens across disciplines or among disciplines. And I'm wondering how your generation of scholarship within the Harvard Art Museums might be able to partake of that interdisciplinarity. You showed, and it was very brilliant, very encouraging, that there was an undergraduate concentrator who has a tailor-made, a custom-made concentration in history of art and chemistry. What about the scholars within the university who might want to collaborate with your staff for research as well as teaching, whose interests cross these disciplinary boundaries? Say, between art history and anthropology, between art history and the business school. I mean, these different ways of thinking that can only happen really efficiently in a research university.
I actually feel like they are happening naturally.
That's good.
And not to say that we're not trying to help it along. I think we have a department that was renamed from the Department of Education to the Department of Academic and Public Programs. And a big part of what they do is to try and invite in across the university somebody that they think might productively either teach with us or collaborate with us. But I think now, 4 years out, we're not having to push as hard because people get it. They're coming.
So I was at a meeting today with Ivan, and he was talking about the virtues of provocation. So I'm going to just dig in on that a little bit. But we have the director of the Harvard Art Museums here. So the first thing is that if we're going to use metaphors like Ferrari, which I'm troubled by, because a Ferrari is fast and elite, and all people and all people are potentially slower, and elite is not within the domain of all people. And I encourage you, and I mean this metaphorically, but also within the sense of the physical, the actual, and the theoretical, that you shift the metaphor to the van or the Volkswagen. And I mean this because I think there's an enormous amount of potency in this shift. And I think that this is I'm going to dig in on the first comment that I made. But I think there is something to say about the shift because I think it moves you into a domain both within your own community across Harvard, because language is everything, the way that we define who we are in the building and everything. And I also think that maybe the issue here, and this points to what David said, is that for us not having the collection is like this enormous obstacle. But maybe for you, strangely enough, and it's a twist, having the collection is a kind of obstacle. And maybe it's just what you showed us, but maybe it is a kind of return to the 58,000 things that doesn't enable you to do what I was thinking about the entire time that you were talking, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think about it a lot, which is not the difference possibly, but what is the varying value between depth and continuity? So if you say that you have the depth of this collection, or the depth, but one of the issues that we confront all the time here, and maybe even you do when you have a collection, is that you do one exhibition, you invest all these resources, the students get involved, and then it disappears. And you never do on the same or on the comparable topic. Even if we have a focused project as a series of exhibitions, there's never a continuity on a same topic. We shift to something else almost immediately. And we live in a time of the disjointed, the variegated, all these things are very important, and I'm not suggesting the linear, but I actually think that a series of things as a way of really digging in on depth is an interesting thing to think about, both from a collection situation and from getting the curators who think that they've had this symposium on social justice, but did they do the rebuttal? Did they come back and kind of say, okay, we had that symposium and we thought about these issues, now we want to address this having come out of that. And we never really use an exhibition here as that kind of platform for the return. Maybe that's, I'm saying continuity, but maybe it's the return to the place where we were and where is it taking us. And I think this is something that as an art museum with a certain rootedness, you could do in really extraordinary ways, and maybe in ways that we might have more difficulty doing here because, we're in an exhibition hall and it's harder to kind of dig into the collection and think about the next piece. But you could do it,
Yeah, so I mean, both of those points are well taken. The Ferrari point, I agree. The Ferrari metaphor is one that was used when I was hired. So I've been very aware that there were high expectations for performance.
Fair enough. Quality in the Ferrari is we embrace. Yeah.
Calling it a Chevy on your interview with them.
Well, maybe a Tesla is the right.
Maybe a Tesla. Yeah, we should go to a hybrid of some sort. Anyway, I think we are ultimately working to leave that elitist model behind it, but Harvard, has justly taken some pride in having managed to build this building at a time when there's a major recession, and there are very high expectations for performance of that museum.
Sorry.
Okay, in just a minute. Your idea about continuity, I think, is really interesting. I'd love to, if you had other examples where you've seen that work, it would be great to hear what they are. But one thing I will say is I think it helps when we have a class embedded in a museum for a semester, because that is, weekly, multiple visits every week, often looking at the same group of objects.
So I actually wrote down the word embeddedness right here because I think that for the academic world, and we were talking about this today, in a meeting of how we were going to schedule focus projects, because you have a class coming in and the students are here for a semester and they're expected to do a Google SketchUp and create an exhibition and then they leave before they can actually realize their project, and we're all dealing with these kinds of realities of simple schedule on campus and all these things. So I think that those are huge challenges.
So I think the embeddedness is something that can happen in an academic environment with proper planning. We had a great example of an Earth and Planetary Sciences class that was embedded in the museum looking at our ancient Chinese jades with the conservation scientists for an entire semester. And so that, allowed that sort of deeper dive, but also the continuity of questions that could be asked and answered over a longer period of time. The other thing we're experimenting with now is not always having the exhibition catalog come out at the beginning, but having it come out at the end.
Guilty as charged. Everybody in this room knows. Yeah.
On purpose, not because someone missed the deadline.
Right.
So when we do our big Bauhaus exhibition next week.
Well, that's fantastic, because then you're actually using the exhibition as a dynamic entity to say, okay, what are the questions that this exhibition raises that we want to put into a volume of,
All of us who are curators know what it feels like to see your exhibition on the wall and you've already written the book and you think, oh, if I only understood then what I understand now, right? And you've had many conversations and you're getting tours and you have a symposium and, and then there's this kind of this
Thing.
line here.
We have time for just one more question.
Okay, so we have one here.
Asked by a former FOG student, a few of us here, but no, I guess it relates a little to Ferrari. One thing in your slides, for people who haven't been there, it would seem like a different building altogether, just a
It feels pretty
modern
different.
building. I think I'd be curious, not for now, for you to, but the whole integration or use of the original and still the building is really the old.
Yeah.
And by the way, and just one more comment in terms of embeddedness or whatever, there's the permanent collection, that's there, and that's
and it's there, but it's a relatively small percentage,
that's
as it always has been. And it's actually more than it used to be on me, but it's still.
right.
The study rooms have revolutionized the way in which the collection is used.
Yeah.
As you
The other thing is we are really rotating the galleries on a pretty regular basis, so it works on paper and most of the galleries, they rotate. And, galleries get recalled and one goes out on loan, so there's, a real effort to try to make sure that we're showing as much of the permanent collection as possible. That's very much a goal.
And that people have access, it's not you.
We do, but yes, and anybody does.
Storage is on site.
About half.
Yeah, I was gonna.
But we have study rooms in the other facility as well, and things do get transported, so that's also complicated.
Well, it's all a little complicated. These
Yes.
institutions are immensely complicated. And I can't help feeling that you are the right person in the right place at the right time to sort out some of these complications and address them. And you've explained to us so clearly this evening your thinking behind how you are addressing these complicated circumstances. So I was going to give you the keys to my Ferrari. The keys to my de chevaux.
I want to thank you all for very good questions. I wish we had time for me to hear a little bit more about what's happening here at BART, but
So,
okay.
but I'd like to invite everyone to thank Bob